Street kid stops millionaire. Don't drive, your wife cut the brakes. What happens next? The torrential rain fell relentlessly over Monterey, turning the streets into raging rivers. For Gael, a 12-year-old street kid, it was just another everyday challenge. The city, which had never welcomed him, seemed to mock him, with lightning lighting up the shadowy alleys where he wandered looking for shelter. Soaked to the bone and shivering from the cold, he spotted a partially open garage in a wealthy neighborhood, an unlikely refuge. After making sure no one was nearby, he slipped inside. The smell of metal and motor oil was oddly comforting. In the corner, an imposing sports car reflected the lightning flashes like a gleaming jewel. Gael knew that place belonged to someone powerful, someone who would never accept him there. But exhaustion beat fear. He curled up behind a stack of boxes, his stomach growling and his clothes clinging to his skin. As he tried to warm up, the sound of footsteps echoed through the garage. He stiffened, holding his breath. Two voices filled the space, one female and one male. At first it sounded like an ordinary conversation, but the words soon froze him more than the rain outside. "This has to look like an accident, Renata," said the male voice, deep and impatient. "Are you sure Salvador is taking the car tomorrow?" "Absolutely, Inigo. He has an early meeting downtown. The brakes are already sabotaged. When he comes down the mountain..." The female voice trailed off for a moment, as if savoring the thought. "It'll be quick." A chill ran down Gael's spine. He didn't know who Salvador was, but he understood perfectly what those words meant. Death. "And the boy?" Inigo asked. "He's sleeping upstairs. He won't even notice," Renata replied coldly. They moved away, still discussing details of the plan, but Gael heard nothing more. His heart pounded in his ears, and he could barely believe what he had just witnessed. They were planning to kill someone, and he knew how. For a few seconds, he thought about running away and never coming back, but even as fear battled inside him, another feeling grew in his chest. Outrage. If he did nothing, that man would die. Gael knew what it was to be ignored, forgotten. He couldn't let someone else become a victim of the same indifference. The night dragged on. He spent the rest of it planning how to approach Salvador. He didn't know how a street kid could get a millionaire to listen, but he had to try. When the sun finally broke through the clouds, Gael was already at the entrance of the mansion, hiding behind the bushes. Salvador came down the steps of the imposing house looking rushed and tense. He wore a flawless suit and carried a leather briefcase. He was exactly the kind of man Gael avoided, rich, unreachable, and seemingly untouchable. Gathering all the courage he had, Gael stepped out of hiding and shouted, "Hey, sir, don't get in the car!" Salvador stopped, surprised. His eyes, cold as steel, landed on the skinny, drenched boy running toward him. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" he asked, in a stern tone. Gael stopped, out of breath. The words came out tangled, but he didn't give up. "They want to kill you. I heard everything. They sabotaged the brakes on the car." "Who are they?" Salvador frowned, taking a step forward. "The woman, Renata, and a man named Inigo. They talked about you, about an accident. I swear I heard it all last night." Salvador stayed silent for a moment, sizing up the boy in front of him. The story sounded absurd, and his suspicion was natural. But something in Gael's eyes, in the urgency of his voice, made him hesitate. "Wait here," he said before heading back to the garage. When the driver inspected the car, the shock came instantly. The brakes had indeed been tampered with. Salvador felt a cold wave run through him as he realized how close he'd come to death. He returned to where Gael was waiting, curled up and anxious. "Who are you?" Salvador asked, now with a hint of admiration. "My name is Gael. I'm nobody, just someone who couldn't let this happen." Salvador took a deep breath. The life he had almost lost had been saved by a boy who had nothing but risked everything. Well, Gail, I think you just became someone very important to me. The morning unfolded with a heavy air, even though the sky over Monterey had cleared after the storm. Salvador couldn't take his eyes off the sports car, now with the tampered brakes exposed before him. The sight was an uncomfortable reminder of how seconds before he'd been staring into his own destruction. More unsettling, though, was that the warning had come from a boy who seemed to have nothing but courage and hunger in his eyes. He turned his attention to Gail, who was sitting on the front step, his clothes still damp from the rain and his expression wavering between defiance and apprehension. "You said you heard that last night. How did you get into my garage?" Salvador asked, crossing his arms. Gail hesitated. He knew honesty could cost him, but what did he have left to lose? "I hid there so I wouldn't get soaked in the rain. I didn't know it was your place. I just heard, and I couldn't leave." The answer was plain, no excuses or embellishment. Salvador felt an involuntary respect grow for the boy. It was rare to find someone willing to act without expecting anything in return, something he suspected was missing among those closest to him. "What do you want from me? Money? Food?" he asked, trying to mask his admiration with a firm tone. Gail shot him a quick look, surprised and almost offended. "I don't want anything. I could have left, but—" He pressed his lips together as if wrestling his thoughts into order. "I couldn't. They want to kill you. Don't you get it? They're going to try again." There was a heavy silence, broken by the crunch of tires on gravel. Salvador turned just in time to see Renata getting out of a black car. She was flawless, as always, with a practiced smile on her face. But now Salvador saw something behind that smile he hadn't noticed before. Calculation. "What mess is this?" Renata asked, looking at Gail with disdain. "Nothing you need to worry about," Salvador replied curtly. "Just something I had to handle myself." Renata paused, as if gauging what Salvador knew. He watched her closely, searching for any flicker of guilt, but Renata was good. Too good. "Why don't you come in, darling? The coffee's on the table," she suggested, trying to ignore Gail's presence. "Later," Salvador said, in a tone that closed the subject. Renata cast one last look at Gail, a look the boy instantly recognized as dangerous. As soon as she disappeared inside the mansion, Gail turned to Salvador. "It was her. I know it was her." Salvador hesitated. Part of him wanted to dismiss it as paranoia, but the condition of his car's brakes left no doubt. There were traitors close. "You're in danger now," Salvador said after a moment. "They're going to want to know who you are." "I've always been in danger," Gail replied with a half smile. "That's nothing new." Salvador was silent, taken by the boy's composure. He knew he couldn't just send him away. There was something about the kid that reminded him of himself, long before he built his fortune. "Come with me. I have a place where you can stay," Salvador finally said. "I don't want your charity," Gail shot back. "I'm not offering charity. I'm protecting you, and honestly, I think you can help me." Gail eyed him warily, trying to see if there was a trap in the man's words. After a slow nod, he agreed. The refugee Salvador provided was a small apartment in a quiet part of town. To Gail, it felt like a palace. He took in the clean walls, the functioning bathroom, the bed with fresh sheets, wide-eyed, but he kept his composure. "You're staying here for now." Salvador placed a bag of clothes and food on the table. "I just need one thing in return." Gail frowned. "What?" "Honesty. Everything you heard, everything you know, I want to hear it too." Gail sighed, feeling the weight of it. He sat and recounted every detail of the conversation he'd overheard. Salvador listened closely, and the tension in his shoulders grew with each word. When Gail finished, Salvador finally spoke, his voice low, almost a whisper. "This doesn't end here, but now you're part of it." Gail didn't fully know what that meant, but he felt his life shift irrevocably. The next morning brought oppressive heat, but Salvador felt a constant chill run up his spine. As he reviewed the information his trusted security operative, Marcos, had gathered about the sabotage, the details confirmed a truth he'd been reluctant to admit. Renata and Inigo were directly involved. Yet there was something more in the records. A suspicious call linked to the name Octavio, a former partner, unearthed bitter memories. Octavio had been a long-time rival, a man Salvador believed he'd left behind. But if Octavio was behind this, then Renata and Inigo weren't the masterminds, they were pawns. At that same moment, in a downtown hotel suite, Renata and Inigo sat together in a luxurious room. "Did you see how he looked at me last night? He knows, Inigo. He knows something," Renata said, pacing, her nervousness visible. "He can't know everything. We're still a step ahead," Inigo replied, trying to reassure her. "And Octavio has it all figured out. Once we take control, Salvador will be just a memory." Renata hesitated, staring out the window. Even with the plan so close to execution, something in Salvador's confidence bothered her. He had never been easy to fool, and the boy who warned him was a new variable they hadn't accounted for. Meanwhile, in the small apartment that had become his temporary home, Gail sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through an old newspaper. It wasn't the content that held him. It was the rare feeling of normalcy he'd never known. Salvador entered, his expression a blend of seriousness and resolve. "Gael, I need your help." The boy looked up, surprised. "My help? I'm just a kid." "A kid who overheard a conversation that could have killed me. A kid with instincts men like me don't have. That's worth something." Gael straightened, trying to hide the pride swelling inside. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to pay attention. To everything. People underestimate kids like you. They say things around you because they think you're not listening. I want to know what Renata and Inigo are doing." Gail thought for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, but if they catch me, you're the one getting me out." Salvador smiled for the first time in days. "Deal." As Salvador and Gail worked to unravel what was happening, Octavio began to press his own accomplices. "Salvador isn't an ordinary man. If he finds out anything, we'll be in trouble. Keep me updated on any suspicious movement. And that boy—" He paused, looking at Renata and Inigo. "Make sure he isn't a problem." Renata swallowed hard, while Inigo tried to mask the tension with a cocky grin. "We'll handle it." But Octavio didn't fully trust them. He had his own moves, and none included leaving loose ends. That night, Gael was at a nearby market, watching from a distance as Renata sat at a corner table with Inigo. Pretending to straighten nearby shelves, he caught fragments of their conversation. "He won't survive the next try," Inigo said quietly. "Octavio is getting impatient, and so should we." Gael didn't hear more, but it was enough to confirm the growing danger. He rushed back to the apartment and told Salvador everything. Salvador sat in silence for a few moments, the gravity of the situation pressing on him. Finally, he stood and looked at Gael. "That means we don't have a choice. We have to fool them." "How?" Gael asked, confused. Salvador walked to the window and looked over the city below. "We'll make them believe they got what they wanted, that they killed me." Gael's eyes widened. "Faking your death? That's insane." "It's the only way out without them realizing we're one step ahead," Salvador replied firmly. "But for it to work, I'm going to need you more than ever." Gael hesitated, but something in Salvador's resolve stirred something in him. He'd never had anyone trust him with something this big. "What do I need to do?" Salvador smiled, though the weight of the plan showed in his eyes. "Whatever I tell you." And so, that night, Salvador and Gael began to shape the plan that would change the course of their lives and put them on a collision path with ruthless adversaries. The city woke up to devastating news. Salvador Montoya, one of Monterrey's most influential businessmen, had died in a tragic car accident. Footage of a vehicle utterly mangled on the mountain switchbacks was running on every channel. Renata's face was marked by a carefully staged expression of grief, while Inigo held himself with a controlled, almost triumphant composure. Outside, journalists clustered to capture any detail. Inside the Montoya mansion, the atmosphere was a mix of restrained relief and underlying tension. "Now it's just a matter of time," Inigo said, watching the headlines. "Octavio will be pleased." Renata, however, seemed uneasy. Something about the plan's perfection was making her restless. "Are you sure he's dead? I mean, absolutely sure?" she asked. "You saw the footage? Nobody survives that," Inigo replied with a smile. But doubt lingered. Far from there, in a modest hideout, Salvador and Gail watched the coverage of the death on television. Salvador was dressed casually, stripped of the immaculate polish that usually accompanied him, while Gail nibbled on a piece of bread, still trying to process everything. "This is surreal," the boy said. "You're here, alive, but everyone thinks you're dead." "And that's exactly how it has to be," Salvador responded, serious. "While they believe they succeeded, we have the advantage." "And now, what do we do?" Gael asked, looking at Salvador. "Now we start gathering evidence. I want to know everything. Who's involved, what Octavio is planning, and how we can expose them before they tear down everything I built." Gael nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of the mission. Salvador trusted him in a way no one ever had, and that gave him a strange sense of purpose. In the days that followed, Salvador and Gael ramped up their investigation. Gael, using his natural ability to go unnoticed, infiltrated a cafe where Renata and Inigo regularly met. He didn't just overhear fragments of their conversations. He also photographed documents carelessly left on the table, including a list of bank transactions tied to Octavio. Meanwhile, Salvador traced those transactions, uncovering that Octavio was using shell companies not only to move money, but to bribe officials. The discovery put Salvador's own plan at risk. If Octavio realized he was being watched, he could act first. "These documents are good, but we need something more concrete," Salvador said, studying the files on his screen. "Like what?" Gael asked. "Something that places them at the right place, at the right time, something indisputable." Meanwhile, at the Montoya mansion, Renata began to sense that something was wrong. "The documents are missing from the safe," she told Inigo, her voice shaking. "Did you touch them?" "Of course not," Inigo snapped, irritated. "Who else would have access?" Renata hesitated, fear showing in her eyes. "He's alive. He's circling us, Inigo." Before Inigo could answer, a message arrived on Renata's phone. It was from Octavio. "Control yourself. Salvador is history. Focus on tomorrow's meeting." "Don't make the mistake of doubting what we saw," Octavio said coldly. "Salvador is dead. Focus on our plan." Renata nodded, but the doubt kept gnawing at her. As the conspirators began to wobble, Salvador and Gael planted new breadcrumbs to ratchet up the paranoia. Gael, leveraging the trust Salvador had placed in him, started to stand out as a key piece. He was quick, intuitive, and, above all, invisible to those who underestimated him. But despite the small victories, Gael began to feel the burden of what was unfolding. During one of his surveillance runs on Renata and Inigo, he was nearly caught by a security guard, forcing him to sprint through Monterrey's alleyways to escape. He arrived back at the hideout, panting and shaken. "I don't know if I can keep going," he confessed to Salvador, eyes brimming. "It's too much. What if I mess up?" Salvador listened quietly before answering. "You've already done more than any grown-up would, Gael. You're with me because I trust you. We'll finish this together." Oh, the words offered some comfort, but also a heavier burden. Gael knew he couldn't fail. The noose was tightening. Salvador and Gael had enough evidence to confront Renata and Inigo, but Octavio remained an untouchable figure. As they plotted their next moves, an intercepted message revealed something alarming. Octavio had called a secret meeting to finalize his plans. It was the perfect opportunity and the biggest risk Salvador and Gael had faced yet. "This is the moment," Salvador said. "We have to be ready." And with that, the plan to expose the conspirators began to take shape. At the imposing Montoya estate, Renata and Inigo were increasingly under pressure. Though the plot had progressed without major setbacks, Renata's unease grew daily. She couldn't ignore the small signs surfacing, the tie draped over a chair, the watch in the study, mysterious documents appearing out of nowhere. Every object seemed to whisper the same terrifying possibility. Salvador was alive. "If he really is alive, we're done, Inigo," Renata said, her voice trembling. "You're seeing things that aren't there. Salvador is dead. We have Octavio on our side, and he assured us everything is under control." Renata shook her head, uncertain. "I don't trust Octavio. He manipulates us like pieces on a board." Inigo, outwardly confident, was beginning to feel the weight of her words. If Salvador was alive, everything they'd risked their lives for would crumble. Meanwhile, in the makeshift refuge, Salvador and Gael reviewed the data they'd collected so far. The documents proved Octavio was using Renata and Inigo as pawns in a much larger scheme, but they still lacked the decisive element to publicly implicate him. "Everything points to him, but we need something undeniable, a record, a confession, something he can't disown," Salvador said, going over the files. "You think they'll say anything at the meeting?" Gael asked. Salvador nodded. "Octavio isn't one to expose himself, but if the meeting is as critical as it seems, he might slip, and we'll be ready." The meeting was scheduled to take place at an isolated estate on the outskirts of the city, somewhere known for discretion and far from prying eyes. Salvador, with help from his contacts, gathered intel on the location and devised a plan to infiltrate it. "You're staying here," Salvador told Gael, adjusting the watch on his wrist. Gael raised an eyebrow. "Are you crazy? You're going alone? It's too dangerous. They won't hesitate to kill anyone who threatens them." "And who said I'm safe here?" Gael countered, crossing his arms. "If they suspect I know something, I'm next, so I'm coming with you." Salvador hesitated, but there was truth in the boy's words. "All right, but you follow my orders. Understood." Gael nodded, feeling the weight of the responsibility settle in. At the estate, tension hung in the air. Renata, Inigo, and Octavio were gathered in a luxurious conference room, but the mood was far from comfortable. Octavio ran the meeting with meticulous control over every detail. "This marks the end of any doubt about who's in charge," Octavio said, sliding a set of documents toward Renata and Inigo. "You sign this, and there will be no more questions." Renata examined the papers, hesitating. "What if Salvador shows up?" Octavio laughed coldly. "He won't. Salvador Montoya is history. Now sign." Outside the perimeter, Salvador and Gael watched the proceedings. Using basic gear, Gael monitored the audio feed coming from inside. "He's making them sign something," Gael whispered, adjusting his earpiece. Salvador frowned. "We need something more, something that directly implicates Octavio." An unexpected move caught both their attention. Renata paused as she reached for the pen. "You didn't tell us everything, Octavio. What else are you hiding?" she asked. "I'm not hiding anything," Octavio replied, but his voice betrayed impatience. Renata's hesitation was the opening Salvador had been waiting for. He signaled to Gael, "Now, let's go." The breach began with an unforeseen obstacle. One of Salvador's police contacts was discovered and neutralized before he could disable the security system. That forced Salvador and Gail to improvise. "Change of plan," Salvador murmured, manually bypassing the alarm on a side entrance. Inside the estate, Octavio spoke calmly, while Renata and Inigo signed the documents that would cement his control over Salvador's assets. When Salvador finally entered the room, Octavio tried to mask his surprise, but Renata dropped the pen. "Surprised to see me?" Salvador said, his voice icy, eyes fixed on Octavio. Tension exploded as Octavio attempted to flee, using Renata as a human shield. Salvador hesitated, but Gail, unexpectedly quick, found a blind spot in Octavio's movement and disarmed him by knocking an object into his hand. The opening allowed Salvador to overpower his rival in a brutal, visceral struggle. Octavio fell to the floor, defeated. Salvador stared down at him, breathing hard. "You're going to pay for all of this." Authorities entered the room, arresting everyone involved. Renata and Inigo sat in silence, broken and humiliated. Salvador, despite the victory, felt a complex mix of relief and pain. As he exited, he found Gail waiting anxiously outside. "Did we do it?" the boy asked. Salvador nodded, placing a hand on Gail's shoulder. "We did." And as the police led the conspirators away, Salvador realized that although the battle had been won, there was still much to rebuild. The morning air was heavy as the police cars pulled away from the estate, taking Octavio, Renata, and Inigo into custody. Salvador watched in silence, feeling a mixture of relief and emptiness. For months, his life had revolved around this moment, but the victory tasted bitter. He hadn't just exposed those who betrayed him, he'd also lost faith in everything he'd once believed was solid. Beside him, Gail watched him with sharp eyes. "And now?" the boy asked, his voice full of expectation. Salvador took a deep breath, turning his gaze toward the horizon. "Now we make sure they pay for everything." The following days were frantic. Salvador handed over to the authorities all the evidence he'd gathered. Incriminating emails, forged documents, suspicious bank transfers. Octavio, as cunning as ever, tried to bargain with information about other players, but the police, bolstered by Salvador's evidence, refused any deal. Renata and Inigo, confronted with the proof, eventually confessed their roles in the scheme. Renata, in particular, looked broken. In the interrogation room, she finally cracked, "He manipulated me. Octavio convinced me that Salvador didn't love me anymore, that he was going to discard me like I was nothing." Salvador, watching from a distance, felt a tightness in his chest. Part of him wanted to believe there was truth to her words, but the other part knew it was too late for forgiveness. As the investigation unfolded, Salvador turned his attention to rebuilding his life. He knew he couldn't go back to the Montoya mansion right away. It was stained by the betrayal that had taken place there. Instead, he started focusing on plans for the future. Gael was always nearby, helping however he could. Despite his youth, the boy demonstrated a remarkable knack for problem-solving and organizing. Salvador began to see him not just as someone he was protecting, but as an unlikely partner. One night, while they worked in a makeshift little office, Gael finally said what he'd been holding in. "Do you think they're really sorry? Renata, Inigo, even Octavio?" Salvador paused, reflecting. "Regret is complicated. Sometimes people only mourn what they lost, not what they did." Gael nodded slowly, absorbing the words. "So, what do you feel?" "Relief, anger, maybe a bit of sadness, but above all, I feel like I need to move forward." The operation against the conspirators culminated in a public trial that drew nationwide attention. Salvador attended, not just as a victim, but as a figure who commanded respect and admiration for taking on those who tried to bring him down. When Renata was convicted, she looked at Salvador with tears in her eyes. "I was wrong, Salvador, but I did it because I was tired of being invisible to you. I was always an accessory in your life, never the priority. Salvador, surprised, hesitated for a moment before replying, "Don't justify your betrayal by blaming what you think was missing. We both made bad choices, Renata, but you chose to cross the line. Some things can't be fixed." Renata lowered her head, defeated. Salvador stepped away, feeling a mix of pity and relief. Octavio, for his part, tried to keep up a facade of control, but his heavy sentence was the final blow to his arrogance. Salvador watched him being led away, feeling that finally that chapter of his life was closed. After the trial, Salvador and Gail returned to the refuge. The city looked different, clearer, like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Salvador looked at Gail, realizing something he hadn't admitted before. "You changed my life, Gail. Without you, none of this would have been possible." Gail shrugged, trying not to show the grin tugging at his lips. "You changed mine too." Salvador laughed, a rare sound in recent months. "I guess we changed each other's lives." As they walked home, Salvador felt ready for the next chapter, not just in his own life, but in Gail's as well. The soft morning light bathed Monterey as Salvador and Gael crossed the park beside the refuge. For the first time in months, the city felt less hostile, more welcoming. The trial of Octavio, Renata, and Inigo had been a milestone, closing a turbulent chapter in both their lives. But as Salvador knew all too well, the end of one battle was only the beginning of another. He looked at the boy beside him. Gael, who had started as a stranger with nothing, was now an essential part of his life. "Have you thought about what you want to do now?" Salvador asked. Gael, hands in his pockets and a thoughtful look on his face, shook his head. "I don't know. I never really thought about the future. It's always just surviving until the next day." Salvador nodded. He knew that feeling well, even if it had been a long time. Then it's time to change that. The weeks that followed were transformative. Salvador used his resources to enroll Gael in a top-tier school, making sure he had the tools to explore his full potential. At first, the boy was hesitant, feeling out of place among the other students, but he quickly proved he had remarkable gifts, especially in math and strategy. One afternoon, Salvador got a call from the school. "Your son, Gael," the principal corrected herself quickly, "has been standing out in an impressive way. He might have a brilliant future ahead of him." Salvador hung up with a smile. He already knew Gael was special, but hearing it from others confirmed what he'd long suspected. The boy had extraordinary potential. He just needed a chance. As Gael thrived at school, Salvador began channeling his own energy into something he'd long felt was missing: purpose. Inspired by Gael's transformation, he conceived a project called Living Future, an initiative aimed at giving vulnerable children the same opportunities that had changed the boy's life. "When I look at you, Gael, I see what could have happened to me if nobody had given me a chance," Salvador said one night. "We can't save everyone, but we can make a difference for some." Gael, listening quietly, felt the weight and scope of that. For the first time, he didn't just see Salvador as his savior. He saw him as a mentor and partner. The initiative took the name Living Future and soon became Salvador's priority. He and Gael worked together, building education programs, housing, and psychological support. Gael, who hadn't initially grasped the impact of his story, became the public face of the effort. At a press conference, the boy told his story with a mix of shyness and pride. "I was just a lost kid. No home, no family. I never imagined someone would trust me, let alone give me a chance. But what Salvador did showed me that we can change, not only our own lives, but other people's too." The room fell silent for a moment, then erupted in applause. Salvador, watching from the side, felt a knot in his throat. He wasn't one for sentiment, but in that moment he realized he'd found a purpose beyond his own ambitions. Years passed quickly. Gael, now a teenager, had become a recognized figure not just for his intellect, but for the passion he showed in helping others. Salvador, in turn, rediscovered a part of himself he thought was lost. The ability to create something meaningful, not just for himself, but for the world around him. One evening, after a benefit event, they walked together. Salvador looked at Gael and saw more than the boy he'd saved. He saw a partner, a successor, someone who would carry on his legacy. "Did you know you'd changed my life like that when you showed up at my door?" Salvador asked, half joking. Gael smiled, a light in his eyes. "I just wanted you not to die. I guess that was a bonus." They laughed, the sound echoing in the night air. "We're going to change a lot of lives together, Gael," Salvador said finally. "We already are, Salvador." And as they walked toward the future, the central message of their journeys was clear. Even in the face of betrayal, pain, and suffering, courage and love have the power to build something extraordinary. What would you do if you were in Gael's shoes? Would you risk everything to save someone you didn't even know, or has his courage inspired you in some way? If this story moved you, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more emotional content like this. Share in the comments what struck you most about Gael and Salvador's journey. We want to hear your take.